resurrection at the last day, our real hope. Resurrection is not something that's difficult to understand. It's outside our experience, but the concept is a straightforward one, and that is that God has the ability to bring dead people back to life again. And when referring to this concept, the Bible often uses vocabulary like raising or rising, and I suppose that's because dead people lie down, and resurrection is them being made to stand again. Indeed, the New Testament word that's most often translated resurrection literally means standing again. Now, there are a number of resurrections recorded in the Bible, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. They are miracles. There aren't many of them. The most famous resurrection in the Bible is, of course, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And perhaps you're familiar with that from the four gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all of which testify to Jesus' resurrection. There are frequent references to Jesus' resurrection later in the New Testament as well, and this is the central teaching of Christianity on which much depends. But there's a third category of resurrection in the Bible, and that's a bit different because it concerns us, or it can do. Now, Jesus tells us about this in John chapter 6. The background to Jesus' words here is a miracle that Jesus has performed, the feeding of the 5,000, when a huge crowd of hungry people were miraculously fed by Jesus using just 5 small loaves of bread and 2 fish. And Jesus uses that incident to speak about God in heaven and the work that God had given Jesus to do. And I'm going to read from John chapter 6 and verse 39. He says, "This is the will of him who sent me, that I should lose nothing of all that he has given me, but raise it up on the last day." Now, that's Jesus' teaching there. Raising people at the last day is a reference to this third category of resurrection. It's talking about those whom Jesus will raise from the dead when he returns to earth. That's what he means by the phrase, at the last day. And so important is this teaching by Jesus that he repeats the same information, expanding on it just a little in the next verse, verse 40. John chapter 6, verse 40. Jesus says, "This is the will of my Father, that everyone who looks on the Son and believes in him should have eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day." Reasonably clear. Those who believe in Jesus Christ are raised from the dead at the last day. And then Jesus adds that additional phrase, eternal life. In the Bible, eternal life is not only about living forever, although it includes that, it's also a reference to the type of life that we will live in the resurrection. It's a life when we never die again. Now, if we find that kind of life difficult to understand, perhaps we might like to think of Jesus himself. He was crucified, and God raised him from the dead, brought him back to life, but he won't die again. And that's how Jesus can say these words of himself. And I'm reading now from the last book of the Bible, Revelation, chapter 1, verses 17 and 18, where Jesus says this, "Fear not, I am the first, the last, and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore." There's Jesus' testimony, therefore. But resurrection is not just for Jesus, because back in John chapter 6, this is something that he says he will do for those who believe in him too. It's going to happen, as we saw, at the last day, which is the reference to Jesus' second coming. So this is not something that we go to heaven for. The Bible never talks about anything like that. It's a reward here on earth. That's one of the reasons why Jesus is returning to earth, to raise the dead, to judge the living and the dead, and to give eternal life to the faithful. Now, the Bible has much more to say on this important topic, but we're just going to confine ourselves to a few more words of Jesus, this time in John chapter 5. I'll read for you John chapter 5, verses 25 to 29. And again, this is Jesus speaking. Truly, truly, I say to you, an hour is coming and is now here when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself, and he has given him authority to execute judgment, because he is the Son of Man. Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and come out, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment. So those words of Jesus summarize some of the things that we mentioned a moment ago. Jesus will return to earth. He will raise the dead. He will judge the living and the dead, and he will give eternal life to the faithful. Well, that's what I wanted to share with you in this presentation. I hope you found it useful. Do feel free to comment in the relevant section on this page. Do look out for other presentations here too. I hope you find all the information here helpful for reaching an understanding of what the Bible teaches, and that's something that we really encourage you to try and do. Thank you very much for listening.